Oh, wow. We're going to watch this together. It's United Nations 2019 conference that was done over in Salt Lake. This was dated August the 20th, so this summer, and it was right before the UN said, no, we're taking this over. This is ours now. Thank you. And they did it funded by the Utah government. And it was not quite $1 million, but when everything was said and done, it was getting up there. And so now he's going to explain to you really well, actually, how, okay, so remember in 1984, remember how everything is backwards? You know, war is peace. Let me go to the images. This right here. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Remember this? Well, this is exactly what the UN is doing. And so this one here, the war is peace thing, is exactly what they're doing. And so as they pretend and say that they are the United Nations peacekeeping force, what that actually means in real language is we are the war dogs. But ironically, what they're, and so they've taken over here, and this is going to spread, according to Dave Hodges. It's going to go into facility after facility as they implant themselves. He's been talking for years about how they're already here, but now they're sort of making their presence known. And our government is completely copacetic with this. And he's actually going to build a case. This guy here from Defending Utah, and I'll let him talk in a minute. He's building a case that the UN is not the watchdog, that the UN is the motivating force behind America going around and starting wars and beating up other countries. And I don't have a problem with our military per se, but I'm talking about the government and the government telling them, go here, do this, blah, 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 blah. And I think it becomes painfully obvious as he sets the agenda and shows you how these wars are started, as he's telling us, through UN resolutions and not things that should be coming from our government per se. And the deduction that you have to come to, the logical deduction, is that with Utah here, they're going to use that same pattern of using our military. And this is the step right before they use our military to attack us.
Document. It says not only does the Charter Organization not prevent future wars, but it makes it practically certain that we shall have future wars, and as to such wars, it takes from us the power to declare them, to choose the side on which we shall fight, to determine what forces and military equipment we shall use in the war, and to control and command our sons who do the fighting. And so the United Nations has been since its inception, its papers, its own founding documents make it a war document. It's a war. And J.R. Griffin, he wrote the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, and he did several videos about the United Nations. I want to share with you a short clip from a video that he produced on the United Nations.
In 1960, in Africa, the Belgian Congo received its independence and established its own government in what later became known as Zaire. The new leadership immediately aligned itself with Moscow and began a campaign of terrorism and destruction in order to eradicate all traces of opposition to itself. When the nation plunged into chaos, one of its provinces, called Katanga, decided it wanted no part of the Red Revolution. It declared its independence and offered to align itself with the West. The will of the people was expressed in the words of their leader, Moise Chambé, who declared to the world, "We are seceding from chaos." Katanga remained a sea of calm amid the bloodshed and violence around it, and by this contrast it became a thorn in the side of the central Congolese government, which now wanted to pull it back under its control. The Red regime was not militarily strong enough to accomplish that by itself, so it asked the United Nations to do it for them. The excuse they gave was that they wanted the UN to put down rebellion and to restore law and order in the Congo. The UN sent most of its military forces not to the central Congo, where thousands of people were being massacred and where law and order were very much needed to be restored, but to Katanga, where they were not needed and definitely were not wanted. The UN declared it was contrary to its own charter to intervene in the internal affairs of the Congo, and that it had no intention of doing so. But it was clear from the outset that this was not the truth. As some of the UN personnel even admitted later in their public speeches and books, the real purpose of the UN was to intervene in the Congo's internal affairs and to force an independent, anti-communist state back under the rule of a communist puppet regime.
Okay, so that the United Nations has never been about peace, has never been about protecting anybody. It is about enforcing and building world government. We have the founding people in the United States that were actually a part of writing the charter and helping to build the charter, men like Alger Hiss or convicted Soviet spies, and working with the Soviet Union to make sure that it was actually building a tyrannical world government. In fact, President Benson, he says that we should get out of the United Nations and get the United Nations out of the United States. And that's out of his chapter in the book, The Enemy Have Done This, called The United Nations Planned Tyranny. The United Nations is designed to be a tyrannical organization. And this is continuing this day. We go to 2015, the UN subverting free people. They are supporting totalitarian regimes where the UN troops are involved in the slaughter of civilian protesters. They actually killed people because they were involved in actually, standing up for their rights. And then we have right here in Utah in 2018, Utah Valley University announced that they were going to join officially the UNDPI, which is the United Nations Department of Public Information. And what you have to do to sign up for this is that you are seeking to promote the agenda of the United Nations. Their role is to raise public awareness and support of the work of the United Nations through strategic communication campaigns, media, and relationships with civil society groups. And so now we have Utah Valley University officially signing up to promote the United Nations anti-liberty, pro-world government, world tyranny agenda. And in fact, when we brought this information to one of the vice presidents of Utah Valley University, he said, well, we have to give every side a point of view. Well, this is clearly false. They are not interested in giving every side a platform to have their point of view heard. No, their job is to make the public aware and to promote the United Nations agenda. And so ever since they joined this last year, they have been pushing to bring the United Nations to Utah. And so in 2015, the UNDPI, this organization that the UVU just signed up to be a part of, they are seeking prison sentences for reporters because they simply did a report on the United Nations incompetence, putting somebody in jail simply for reporting incompetence, totally the antithesis to our idea of freedom of the press, the government being held accountable by people reporting on their actions. No, but the United Nations cannot handle that because you have no rights that go contrary to their purposes. In the next year, 2016, Matthew Lee was actually accused of exposing corruptions, as if that was like a crime, is to expose corruption. So they take away his press credentials simply because he was exposing United Nations corruption. The United Nations, of course, we have here Jackie Biskipsky on the Utah Valley University's website announcing that the UN is coming to Salt Lake City in August of this year. And as a part of that, she talked about some of the things that were going on. Why are they bringing the United Nations to Utah? And she actually mentioned a lot of the skeptics that are here in Utah against the United Nations, that they are coming despite the critics in our state that want what the UN is and what they do. And she says it's kind of unnerving for some of my political partners to think about the UN being here. Well, of course, because they are the antithesis of liberty. They are the antithesis of what America was founded upon, and instead she is bringing them here for the purpose of promoting UN Sustainability Goal 11, which is a key function of Agenda 2030, or you can Google Agenda 2030 or Agenda 21, which are very similar. Also go to defendingutah.org and do a search for Agenda 21, and you'll see what that is. But essentially, a broad overview, Agenda 2030, what she's promoting as Sustainability Goal 11, is the eradication of property rights and the family. And so the Utah legislature has been working to give your tax dollars, the money you work hard for and have it confiscated by the state government, is using that money to fund this UN trip to the state of Utah. It was requested to get $755,000 for this conference coming up later on this month. And what's interesting, what is this money going to go to? It says right here, the UN host committee is requesting funds as enhancements for the event. So,
but when everything was said and done, the total amount that and put your ears on now, our government in Utah gave the UN 650 what was it, $650,000, and then they got another 100,000 on top of it.
A part of the Politburo, so we're not allowed to report on their activities. And so UN Sustainability Goal 11 is part of Agenda 2030. So Agenda 2030 is the most current program that's implemented of what was Agenda 21. I won't have time to go into it right now what that is, but please look into it further on our website. It was adopted in 1992 at the conference in Rio de Janeiro, and it's described as a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced, as a major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. This shift will demand that a concern for the environmental consequences of every human action be integrated into individual and collective decision-making at every level. And so as we see that now this conference coming to Utah will be promoting is the idea of the government getting into every decision that we made in every part of our lives, and that the government will now have to be a part of that because, of course, every part of our lives affects the environment. And so a part of what they say is about this is they promote this idea of sustainable development. Now, what is sustainable development? Well, Maurice Strong, at the opening speech, explained what was not sustainable to help us to understand what they are promoting as sustainable. He says that current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake, the use of fossil fuels, electrical appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. So, your house with your quarter-acre lot where you can garden on, or, when have air conditioning in the hot summer where it's 100 degrees outside, that kind of stuff right there, electrical appliances, being able to have, a washer and a dryer or an oven or a dishwasher, that's what they're saying when they're promoting it and bringing it to Utah, is saying what they're trying to get rid of in the future, which is why we're seeing this huge push in the state of Utah where the Utah legislature is mandating high-density housing in the cities and threatening to take away, road funds if they don't go along with it.
Oh, wow. Okay, so, they kind of use how do you say that woman's name, that Democrat, and nobody can stand her, Cortez or Cortezio or whatever. She's kind of like the face of this movement that everybody can direct their hatred to. But in all reality, back behind her is this whole push of the UN through the cooperation of our government of traitors who are actually pushing these things through. She kind of is the lightning rod for the abuse and the stupid memes and the illusion that you're fighting back when you put out memes, making fun of her, like that's a really big thing to hurt her. But they still achieve their goal in the end. So, yeah, like he was saying, 11 has to do with the making the cities and the human settlements supposedly inclusive, supposedly safe, and supposedly resilient. So, totally overhauling the way that you live. So here you can take a look at this. This is insane, but this is what's being pushed through for global government. Oh, and the no meat goes along with no hide laws too.